This is turn 38 of Ekwipt my heavy crossbow, and we finally get to see those SCs in action. We find a couple more magic sites, including 2 death sites here, so that's awesome. We can definitely spend all of our death gems on making more of these tomb oracles. Here we retake the province that Pythium took with his Hydras. Because he has only one commander, he can only hit a couple provinces at a time, which means that as long as I'm able to constantly move onto the provinces that he is taking, I can basically just take him around and prevent his much more expensive group of Hydras from actually doing any economic damage by using a relatively cheap squad to just continually retake the provinces that he grabs from me. In order to beat that, he would need to invest a fair amount of province defense, which of course could then be wasted if my army wins, or if I start deploying mate support of my own, which I'm going to be needing to do anyways in order to fight those Hydras. Here he basically just sends like a little scouting party in to the Mountains of Mist over here in order to see what I have. He sent some Toad Tribe warriors across the swamp over here. But my raiding goes pretty well, so even though I lost those swamps over here, I'm able to siege this fort, which is fairly valuable since it's a farm province, so I get a little bit of income from that, which is even connected to my lands, thanks to my retaking this sea province over here. And I'm able to successfully raid this, which gives me a little bit more gold and even some astral income. And you can see here that while Pythium does have growth, his Heat 3 reduces his income by a little bit, and as does his Sloth 3. And with Drain 3, he's going to be a little bit behind on, or very behind on research as well. Pythium is definitely not well known for having like expensive high path mages, the way that Agartha does with our Chthonian alchemists. So as a result, the Drain 3 is definitely crippling to his research. So while he does have some magic ready, and we'll be able to see some the magic that he does deploy, it also means that it's going to be difficult for Pythium to pivot. Like, he can't switch from one type of mage support to another very easily, just because he can't research far enough in order to have a large number of options available. So that was one of the raiding groups. This is just retaking a sieged castle over here. So his army, this is the guy who was basically just reinforcing my skeleton spam group with the light crossbowmen and some fire elementals. And then here, my tomb oracle tried to break siege, and he doesn't win the fight, but the reason for that is on account of the fear aura from the Hydras rather than the tomb oracle himself actually being in trouble. So here we can see Pythium's mage support. So he casts Rain, which is going to increase the fatigue cost for my fire elementals, for my fire elemental summoning, and it's also going to make it so that the fire elemental's heat aura is significantly reduced. We can also see that he's casting Foul Vapors here. So Foul Vapors is going to deal poison damage across the entire battlefield. Most of his mages are nature mages, so they are completely immune to that. And his Hydras are, of course, poison resistant, and they even have poison auras of their own. However, aside from my dinky little crossbowman here, who's basically just set up as a bait unit, my guys don't need to worry about this at all either. So I've got Ichikis, the Tomb Oracle. I didn't bother renaming him. So he's casting up a bunch of spells, mostly just buff stuff. I can't really see what they're scripted for from this, since these look like just default spells. Presumably there's nothing in range of whatever they would actually be casting. And then he's casting Iron Skin as well. So between Iron Skin, the Blessing with the E9 Bless, and the armor that he is wearing, he has very high protection. So 28 body, 31 head protection. He also has 20% regen, 10% from the Ring, and 10% from the Bless. And then he gets yet more protection and defense from these Bracers of Protection here. He's casting a Holy Avenger, basically just because may as well. He's got a fair amount of reinvigoration, basically just from my Earth Bless as well, so he doesn't need to cast Earth Power. And because he's an undead unit with 0 encumbrance, he's totally fatigue neutral. Also, there's no encumbrance on any of his gear, so his shield, Divine Shield, is just like a light vine thing. His armor here is quite light, so his his encumbrance is just the actual fatigue cost of the spells, rather than having an additional one from his armor. So the crossbowman dies, and the Tomb Oracle starts running forward. When a unit gets into melee range like this, then he basically is stuck in melee combat. I had him set to attack rear just on the off chance that he is able to slip by the enemy army and start killing mages, but it's a very low chance of that actually working out. His getting surrounded like this is definitely within expectation. So Word of Power being spammed by that H4 priest is keeping him paralyzed. However, even with his being paralyzed, these hydras just can't hurt him. Unfortunately, most of his attacks are being wasted on these summoned skeletons here. However, when he does hit the Hydra hatchlings, he definitely kills them as well. Fights with super commands like this aren't super exciting to watch, because it's basically just one guy not taking damage, being surrounded by people, and in this case he's even being paralyzed a fair bit so that he can't hit back. And you can see that little flash there shows that the awe effect is definitely working. You can also see his morale is dropping down from the fear aura of the Hydras. Those little bursts of light that are occasionally doing damage to nearby units is from the Holy Avenger spell that he cast. You can see he also got his first affliction, which is his chest wound here, but because he doesn't have any encumbrance from fighting, it's not a huge deal. And you can see here he finally gets a chance to hit this Hydra, and even with fire damage and an armor-piercing weapon, he's not able to kill it in one round, but he is able to chop through it quite a bit. So he's actually routed now because, yeah, when you're surrounded by a bunch of fear effects like that, it can eventually happen. However, even when routing, he basically is still going to be fighting his way back out, which means that everything between him and his escape is probably going to die. Unfortunately for me, not a whole lot tries to block his path, so the losses that he inflicts are relatively limited. He only kills 2 Hydras and 12 Hydra hatchlings, but I don't lose really anything by doing that, and I could basically, aside from the opportunity cost of not having the SC do anything else, and yeah, so I can keep doing that and basically just keep whittling down that army of Hydras. He also spent a fair number of gems on those battlefield buffs or battlefield spells that we saw, so I'm very happy to just continue doing that whenever I get the chance, just bounce him off of it. Eventually he might be even succeeding in his morale checks against those fear auras, and then he can chop up even more of those Hydras before he has to escape. Here, my attempt to raid the Golan Fens with my Alchemist casting his elementals just doesn't work. So it's not the end of the world. This was a relatively low commitment raid. The reason that it doesn't work is that these guys here, the Province Defense Archers, tagged my mage at the start of the fight because they hadn't summoned the elementals yet. So yeah, he got shot up right away before the elemental could get into melee range of the Province defense. So that was a waste of some gems, a little bit of gear, not all that great. However, I'm able to continue, or my raiding, as I mentioned earlier, was successful, so that's nice. And then here, his infantry tried to escape into my skeleton spam group here. And between the ethereal, I guess, site spawn, my tiny bit of province defense, and the hordes of skeletons, I'm able to take them on. So you can see here that thanks to their relatively high defense and ethereal, they're able to avoid most of the attacks, while these guys here are getting paralyzed by these guys. More importantly, though, they're able to stall the enemy infantry lineup for long enough in order for yet more of these skeletons to start coming out. While they're able to trade effectively with the skeletons are going to continue coming out until the fight's over, and in the meantime, this guy here is even going to be shooting some acid spells. Shadow Soldiers have really great defense, so they actually hold up the enemy army quite well, even if they're not doing any very much real damage to them. Units that are already paralyzed actually do take physical damage from paralyzed damage, but most of the damage is being caused by these skeletons over here. And eventually my army wins. Pythium's army is routed. Pythium attempts to hit me in the Sting Swamp as well, and he's actually able to raid there successfully. So that's just his amphibious guys. Here he sends another small raiding party of infantry, and then here his Hydras do manage to take over this Ichthyid province. So that's a bit of a loss there in that I still had a bunch of Ichthyids being built up. I wasn't sure where that group was going. So I'm going to start countering that by sending some water elemental summoners underwater. While the water elementals aren't going to be hitting a vulnerability in the way that the fire elementals do against the Hydras, they should still be able to do relatively well because when fighting underwater, water elementals have increased defense. They are fully amphibious, so they have no penalties from fighting underwater. And then they're also going to even have a bit of regen. So, yeah, they're going to be doing 4 high damage, armor-piercing attacks. They're going to be fighting with great combat stats, and they're totally immune to both the Fear Aura and the Poison Aura from the Hydras. So with that, I'm fairly optimistic for the Water Elementals. And then meanwhile, these guys are going to be trying to retake the province, and my raiding parties are just going to be going further into Pythium's territory. It's worth noting that these things are totally expendable. As long as they can hurt Pythium's economy and help mine out in the process, I'm very happy with them. This guy is going to continue raiding south. This big old group of fire elemental summoners, skeleton summoners, and a small retinue of human soldiers are going to be marching onto Pythium's castle here. This is a little bit more expensive than just a raiding party, but given that I have a bunch of fire gems, and I'm going to be getting a large number of elementals from that, I think that they actually have really good chance of taking on the Hydras. Oh, right, let's talk about the Hall of Fame. So, getting into the Hall of Fame is a natural result of killing a bunch of things on his own. Or unequaled obesity is actually a really great heroic thing to get for these guys, because the increased encumbrance that they would suffer from their heroic ability doesn't matter for their melee combat, because they are undead, and the increased HP that they get from their ability is awesome. So, 34 bonus HP on top of his existing 85 is going to make him even more resilient. And then he also gets additional strength from that as well. So that's going to help make up for his chest wound and make his melee attacks do even more damage, which is helpful against the high HP Hydras. Here, I'm basically just sending off these little guys in little splinter raiding parties. So wherever his Hydras aren't, my raiding parties should be able to take over the province. And wherever the Hydras are, they're just mercenaries, so I don't particularly mind losing them. This guy here, he was holding this in case Pythium attacked it. He's going to be going deeper into Pythium's territory right over here. This is something that I have to be a little bit concerned about, given that these guys, the only way they can really die is from the Fear Ore of the Hydras making them rout. So I want to be able to secure a retreat path for him. So as a result, I'm also going to be hitting this province right over here with a bunch of Skelly spammers. So unless he moves this group of Hydras off of this fort and over into here, I should be able to do okay with that. And then I'm also making additional gear here so that I can gear out another Tomb Oracle as soon as possible. And then I'm also going to be continuing to summon Tomb Oracles. I'm making another one right over here. The idea being that right now they're basically the best weapon that I have. Pythium is going to have to figure out a way to answer them, and there are a couple things that Pythium can do, like using a front line and then spamming Dust to Dust with his Death Mages, Communion summoning up a bunch of Water Elementals to do armor-piercing attacks, that sort of thing. But until he actually does deploy a counter, my Tomb Oracles are going to be basically able to attack him with impunity. And even when he does deploy a counter, because my Tomb Oracles are able to be equipped with Shade Mail Halberdians, I can use them stealthily and basically try to avoid his Mage Balls. And until he starts recruiting up a bunch of Thurges, which I can see that he doesn't have from his capital over here, he's not going to have any Magic Phase answers, which means that my Tomb Oracles can basically just walk around his Mage Balls whenever he starts deploying them. So with that mobility on my side, and the fact that they can be equipped to survive against, or even with their current equipment and their script, they can survive against a reasonable number of Water Elementals. So he's going to need to actually really spam out mages in order to actually take these guys on. So while they are expensive, until he actually shows that he can answer them, I'm going to continue making them. And even when he does start to answer them, I can still be able to use them strategically to get myself an advantage by taking on more of his provinces. So, Pythium did have the initial advantage, just because he was the initial aggressor in this war. I have essentially equalized that in province numbers already, and I'm going to continue attacking him in order to try to get myself further ahead. This is turn 39 if I equip my heavy crossbow. I awakened yet another Tomb Oracle, and I built some gear for him as well. I found another Temple of Darkness, which is cool. I already liked using those shade units. I got an enchanted field here, so a little bit more nature magic, which is nice because I need nature gems in order to make items for my SCs. And I found the wildflower glade here, which is more fire gems, which I definitely can use, both for gear in order to fight Pythium with my Tomb Oracles, and for fire elementals. So here, my raiding party was defeated when it tried to go further into Pythium's territory, just by a bunch of province defense. Here, Pythium retook one of the provinces which I raided off of him with a huge number of crossbowmen. So the Magister Militum is Pythium's high leadership unit. They're pretty great. They've got a large morale bonus for their squads. So that's kind of like having a free fanaticism cast on your army there. The large number of, or the large amount of leadership also means you can put together a fair number of formations, which helps with setting up your troops without having a morale penalty. Here, his attempt to raid my province fails. Oops, that's the Moonsea here, because of all that PD that I got from an event. So that event is definitely paying off, so it's pretty nice. And then this was the other raiding party, which also died to PD. So that's too bad, but those were expendable raiding parties to begin with. Here, Pythium put no PD at all, so my skeleton spammers and small number of blind fighters was able to raid in successfully. Here, his big army just hit the province that the Tomb Oracle moved out. He moved out from, and then he's got a bunch of these Death Mages here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. So this is Pythium's first army that we see that is based on not Hydras. So instead, he has these guys over here. Because these guys are Death Mages, they can cast Dust to Dust, so they are potentially lethal against my Tomb Oracles, even with only Thaumaturgy 1. However, Dust to Dust's limited range means that as long as the Tomb Oracle is held back far enough, because you can see here that my province defense here is just like in the middle, and given the amount of room here, we can see that his formation is actually set relatively far back. So if I were to fight this army with Tomb Oracles, all I would need to do is put my Tomb Oracle in the corner, make sure that he does all of his buffs, and then he's not going to be vulnerable to Dust unless he runs fairly far forward. So I can't tell if these guys are off script or not, because, yeah, or if he actually is intending to spam skeletons like that. However, as I mentioned, even if they are scripted to cast Dust to Dust, as long as I can route the army beforehand, I can definitely take this on with the Tomb Oracle. Oh, so that's the Frost Breath here. This is a range 6 cone attack. Because these guys are undead, they have cold, essentially immunity. They have 25 resistance, so they're not taking any damage when the cold breath blasts over them. However, these guys here are relatively expensive. They have to be summoned individually if you're not casting Dragon Master or making Dragon Mastery items, which means that they're relatively expensive, both in mage turns and in terms of the number of gems that it costs for each one, which means that each one that is lost here to crossbows or to heavy cavalry and so on is a fairly significant hit. Oh yeah, and then the Frost Breath is also something that my Tomb Oracles are totally immune to, so they're not going to be hugely effective against them. That was here, yeah. So he loses one of these Ice Drakes, and he loses one of his regular infantry, but, you know, no major losses, and he does take over the province. Here in Lake Vastness, his Hydras are able to successfully capture the province, I think. Oh, no, this is where I had deployed my mages, right. So he split up his underwater force into two. One of them ran into my water elementals. So I've got 4 guys first casting water power, then summoning up water elementals. And you can see here I'm using these water lenses so that they don't need to, or so that most of them don't need to restock on at a lab. The province defense here is just these Titans. So the province defense does negligible damage and then gets chased away. And now the water elementals come up. So you can see here that the stats of the Hydras are a little bit reduced from being underwater. So even though they have an experience bonus, they have a -3 penalty for fighting underwater. The water elementals definitely do not. Instead, they have additional defense, a large number of high damage, high attack attacks. So this fight isn't nearly as one-sided as the fights against the fire elementals are, and you can see that the Hydras are able to even kill the water elementals relatively effectively. However, the water elementals do not rout, and Pythium's forces do once they lose a fair amount, or a sufficient amount of their on the battlefield health. And given how slow the Hydras are underwater, with only 3 move, and this guy doesn't even have any like movement debilitation, he's just really that slow underwater. My water elementals are able to catch them, and most of them are still able to get away thanks to their incredible resilience, but they are able to pound down one of the full-size Hydras and do some more damage to the others to cause a bit of afflictions among them. So he still has 5 of the full-size Hydras remaining, and I had to spend a couple water gems in order to do that. However, most of those gems are going to be reusable because I have it on the item there. So I'm going to start chasing after these Hydras. Oh, that's the other thing. When a unit retreats, actually, he's no longer part of the same squad. And because Hydras are not actually amphibious, they are no longer with the Battle Deacon who had the item to give them water breathing, which means that all 5 of those retreating full-size Hydras actually died. So that was actually an even bigger win. So I'm definitely going to chase after him with my water elemental summons, and he was going to actually need to reinforce this in order to do that. But because I left some Ichthyids here, sieging down this fort, he probably just doesn't have anything in range in order to help them out. So unless he wants to bring this force over here, and he doesn't know if I'm bringing more stuff or not, it would be very risky of him to do that. He could potentially lose everything, so I don't think he's going to take that risk. Instead, I'm going to send these guys down over here. I'm sending one of these guys back onto land here in order to get more gems, because the water elementals are what really did it. So, like, water evocation here, like Geyser and Encase in Ice, can potentially help, but it's not nearly as useful as the elementals themselves. I'm using these guys in order to hold the line, because these guys are a little bit faster, they'll run forward, and I could potentially lose them, which would be great. And yeah, let's go look at these other battles here. Okay, so my Tomb Oracle here, this time is accompanied by some alchemists. So my hope for this fight was that I would be able to have these guys each summon up 2 fire elementals, and then retreat, or 1 fire elemental and then retreat. The reason that I'm doing that is that the Tomb Oracle here has magic leadership, so he can actually lead the fire elementals. But this spell here, Howl, totally turns the fight. I was not expecting him to have that spell researched, because Pythium was running Drain 3, and he hadn't cast it in the last battle that I saw with my Tomb Oracle, so definitely caught me off guard with that spell. So what Howl does is it basically spawns wolves on the edge of the map at the start of each of Pythium's turns. So you can start seeing that the wolves are starting to come in over here. The wolves are affected by foul vapors, of course, so they are going to take some damage over time from his own battlefield spell. However, these wolves are going to continue spawning throughout the fight. Additionally, because they spawn at the edge of the map, they're not going to be impeded by these fire elementals, and they're going to be able to attack my alchemists. Because of the rain effect, there was an increased fatigue cast for the fire elementals, which means that all of my alchemists are currently unconscious from fatigue. And you can see here that the wolves have no trouble killing the unconscious alchemists. Additionally, the wolves are going to intercept the fire elementals, which means that the fire elementals are not fighting his real units full time. Instead, they're going to be wasting attacks fighting these battle summons. Many of them do make it to the Hydras, of course, and the Hydra hatchlings get, well, they just get run over by these fire elementals. So that part at least is very effective. And you can see here, even when the Hydra hatchlings are killing the fire elemental, because of the heat shield that the elemental has, it's able to burn them right back and cause a fair amount of damage to them. So the fire elemental part of the strategy is working great. Unfortunately, I just had to lose all of my alchemists in order to do that, and that's no fun. And Word of Power is paralyzing this Tomb Oracle once again. When the units are routed, the fire elementals, because they require magic leadership, are effectively routed as well. Because they're mindless, they actually start to melt once they have no leadership, so they're no longer attacking whatsoever. However, they are still doing a bit of damage with their fire shield. Unfortunately, while these Hydras do get fairly low, they have a very high HP pool and regeneration, of course. And my Tomb Oracle routes off the battlefield. So that was actually a somewhat expensive loss. I lost 5 of my alchemists, and I also lost a fair number of gems in the process. However, in spite of it being a loss, I did manage to kill 36 of these hatchlings here. So that's actually a fair amount of gold for him as well. Let's see, it's 36 times 28. Yes, that's over 1,000 gold, over 1,200 gold, including the big Hydra there. So I actually killed more gold than he did, and he also spent an almost equivalent number of gems just on those big battlefield spells. So yeah, even though he still has almost all of his full-size Hydras, and I would definitely not take that trade again, it still wasn't a total loss. And then here, I'm able to capture this, or start besieging this province. Unfortunately, I have to spend a huge number of gems to do that. So you can kind of see that here. Even though it's only fighting province defense, because there's a fair amount of province defense, and I... Oh wait, no, this is the... I don't need to spend a bunch of gems. Oh yeah, I'm just summoning up a bunch of fire elementals, so... A reasonable number of gems, but not like a massive expenditure. So these fire elementals would have been very important if they actually were fighting hydras, but as it is, they're definitely not needed. And while it is definitely excessive, they're still very killy, so they're able to do most of the damage against the province defense here. It's worth noting that the heat aura would normally be causing fatigue and such, but because my guys have an E9 Bless, they are able to recover that right up, so between that and their regeneration, I don't need to worry about the fire aura killing my own guys. And yeah, while that was a bit wasteful, it definitely has no trouble taking the province. Here, my Tomb Oracle has no trouble fighting province defense, and indeed he's going to run up here and see if he can catch those Hydra hatchlings and such. Meanwhile, I'm awakening yet another Tomb Oracle in here and getting some more gear for him. But let's take a look at the rest of these battles. So, Tomb Oracle, yes, so another raiding party here. That was... and that was my little raiding party here. It kills one of the Hydras, or it makes one of the Hydras switch forms, and it doesn't fully regenerate at the end of the battle, but effectively no losses here. So let's take a look at that, and we'll see if he has any differences in his scripting here. Doesn't look like he does. Just lots of blessings, a little bit of evocation. His Hydras are killing his own PD, but it's just PD, so it's going to come right back, so nothing worth noting there. But like I mentioned when I was doing the attack, this is just a mercenary company, so I don't particularly mind their loss. Here, he is able to take over Small C, or retake this province here. So, not much there. And this raiding party here is successful in recapturing the swamp, and it's going to go over here in order to delve deeper into Pythium's territory. I'm setting a little bit of PD over here, just in case I can take that. And yeah, his toads died to the thing there, like I mentioned. And this little raiding party over here is able to delve deeper into Pythium's territory. I'm nervous about moving it further up, though, because I can see that he summoned a bunch of gargoyles here, and he definitely has the mages to lead them. Gargoyles are flying statue units, so they're able to jump on my guys right at the start of a fight. And given how many he has, I don't want to risk my mages against them. However, because I don't think he has flying commanders for them, I expect he's just going to move it up over to here. Meanwhile, this crossbow blob is definitely too many to be wasted just retaking this, so he's most likely going to move that up here. Or at least that's my expectation. So as a result, I don't want to send this guy deeper into Pythium's territory because both of those would just be losses. Instead, these guys are going to site search. I'm going to have this guy here hold down the castle on his own, while the rest of my army regroups over here, and then they're going to be able to move down over here, potentially, in order to sync up with this group of skeleton summoners and a little bit of extra mage support there. While this guy here essentially just literally holds the fort. And as long as this castle is sieged, I'm getting most of its income, so that's definitely worthwhile. I'm going to be moving over most of my army right over here. So this is basically just a full Agarthan mid-game army. Lots of Horde of Skeletons spamming. A little bit of evocation from this Demented guy over here. Flaming Arrow support, lots of crossbows, and of course a couple elementals which have formed mostly the core of my mage support up until now. I have undead flankers over here, so high damage cold aura units. The cold aura itself isn't going to be particularly useful against the stuff that he has there. However, units set to fire do not check the resistance of their targets, so the ice drakes might waste their cold breaths on my own cold immune undead, and these guys are much more efficient in terms of gem expenditure compared to the regular whites and drakes. So as long as I can have this squad fighting his own squad of undead and cold drakes, I would definitely be getting the advantage there. And then my core of sacred infantry over here should have no trouble taking on the core of his army, because they're so much more resilient. And unlike him, I'm going to have flaming crossbows supporting my units as well. So I expect to be able to win this fight if he takes it. Meanwhile, I'm going to have my Tomb Oracle run over here. So if either of these two groups runs over to this province, they're going to be fighting an SC. And then this province right over here is going to not really be defended. I'm just leaving the 1 PD on the fort there. However, it's going to be isolated, because if I win these fights over here, it's basically going to be surrounded and it can do nothing other than be a very expensive raiding party. He could potentially split it up and delve deeper into my territory here, but because I'm able to use small numbers of mages effectively as elemental summoners, and I have additional units over here, I should be able to counter his raiding quite effectively. And then meanwhile, I'm going to be sending basically just guys over here to just retake this, so I'm just going to use some mercenaries for that, and yeah, basically just raiding and counter-raiding over here. So while my own raiding parties did get shut down into Pythium's territory, he still hasn't shown an answer for these Tomb Oracles, and while he did take some losses of the mages there, I'm overall still doing very well in this war, and I'm going to continue trying to push into Pythium's territory while they have the advantage. Additionally, I'm going to start forging a Starshine Skullcap and getting additional Astral boosters, because I'm soon going to be able to hit Construction 7, and at that point I'm going to be able to use Golems in addition to these Tomb Oracles as SCs, and that's going to be able to provide me magic phase movement. Golems are also going to be useful because they are mindless, and as a result they are fearless, so they're not going to care about the fear aura from the Hydras at all. And that's the turn.